Hello and welcome to the second edition of Bureau Bytes. It is my pleasure to be joined today by Sourabh Gupta, a name who's synonymous with the Indonesian Fintech scene. Today, Sourabh heads the product, design and data functions at Flip, which itself is a pioneer in the Indonesian Fintech scene as well. Prior to Flip, Sourabh also spent a fair amount of time in GoTo, where he had a product there as well. Sourabh, please make yourself comfortable, and it is our pleasure to have you here. Thank you for taking the time out for Bureau Bytes.
Thanks, Ishan. Good to be here. And thanks for the lovely introduction. Thank you.
Sourabh, I think I'll start with my first opening question here. When Flip started, and I think it's been a while since they started, but they started mostly as a payments player, right? An interbank payments player. But cut to that, if we look at Flip today, you have a merchant line, you have an e-wallet, you are doing overseas remittances, and you also have a rewards line as well, right? And I know, by virtue of having known you for a while, that you were instrumental in setting up the product teams to cater and service to all of these requirements. So maybe if you could shed some light on how you went about creating an efficient product structure at Flip.
Sure. So you rightly said that, earlier Flip was known for being a pioneer in, solving the interbank transfers problem, right? That's how we started. That's how we found a first product market fit. I joined Flip about 5 years back, and that was one product we were known for. But we had a long-term vision, right? We wanted to be a fintech platform offering not only payments, financial service, investing, not only for consumers, but for B2B as well, right? So we had a long-term vision. And hence, one of my charters was to visualize this team who will be able to build this product over a long term, right? And the kind of person I am, I believe that irrespective of your size, right processes and right structure is the foundation to scale any organization. I mean, it's like building a building, right? If your foundations are shaky, the building is going to crumble, right? While I don't expect that you are being very rigid and building a very matrixed organization, it's because it's important for growth stage companies to be agile. But at the same time, it should not be so loosely coupled that teams are not clear about the scope they will be managing month on month, right? And when it's changing very frequently. Because in product, you need to have context, and building context takes time, right? So that was my fundamental when I joined the company, understood the vision and had a task at my hand. So the first thing I wanted to do in the organization was have a common structure for product engineering and design. And that was some of my learnings from my previous organizations as well, where product engineering design works together as one single unit, right? So that means you need to have a common structure. It cannot be that product team is structured in a certain way, engineering team is structured in a different way, right? Because you're solving a common problem. So that was the first alignment that I did, that we'll have a common structure for all the three teams. And then I aligned everyone on the principles on how we'll be designing this team. And some of my thoughts were, number one, to build teams to give them autonomy and clarity of purpose. Meaning that there shouldn't be interdependence between teams, because that makes it difficult for teams to move forward quickly, and the scope should be mutually exclusive. I had seen organizations where two teams are doing the same thing, and then like, hey, why are you doing the same thing, right? So having clear autonomy and clarity of purpose on what are you doing, why does this team exist, was one of the first principles that I thought of. The second thing which I did was I wanted to devise teams around a scope and not necessarily around a metric, right? To enable long-term charters. Now, this could be controversial because, you have heard of building teams around pirate metrics, acquisition, retention, so on and so on. But I had a different view because I wanted team to own an area so that they can go deep into that and plan for a long term on how they can excel in this particular area. And metrics can change. Like one quarter, you can focus on one thing in that particular scope and it can change in future, right? So again, there's no right or wrong. We felt that at that time, building teams around scope rather than metrics made more sense. And that's how one of the principles that we followed. The third idea was to have teams build platforms which can be reused, right? And that doesn't mean just building a standalone platform team, but even in all your product verticals, have teams, two types of teams, right? Service teams and platform teams, where platform teams are building common components which helps us move faster, much easily. And the last principle was to provide product coverage for both functional and internal teams. This again was my learning from my previous organization, where I had seen that sometimes finance team, they had no one to talk to for product. They were confused, like, where do we go? Operations team, they have so many issues, whom do we talk to? Same with fraud team, they didn't know whom to talk to, right? So these learnings from my previous experience really helped me cement the right fundamentals and principles for devising the org structure. And once the principles were defined, then I spend more time figuring out, okay, how should be the hierarchy? We'll have product verticals. Within product verticals, we'll have product pods. And within pods, you'll have, let's say, streams. Like, streams would be the smallest component at which a team operates. And none of the teams will be in double digit, right? So following that old principle of single digit teams, 2 pizza rules. So those were some of the things we kind of ingrained on how we'll be, setting out and defining the teams. And lastly, once all the structure is ready, what I see is, in a lot of times in organization, as organizations scale, they're still very dependent on the leaders, right, for decision. And that becomes a bottleneck. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to build a team which was independent. So once I have a clear structure, I had to think about how do I staff this team as well, right? So spend insanely a long amount of time, even closing my first role, because I wanted to make sure the initial team we are building consists of people who are intelligent, who can disagree with me, who are leaders of tomorrow, who can carve their own path and have high agency, right? And that lays the foundation of how you hire going forward as well. So those were, I think, some of the points on how I've structured the team, thought about hiring, and how we went about it. I mean, I like to close this off with the point that a lot of time when companies scale, they think that to scale, you need to hire more people. But I think more than hiring people, you need to drive more clarity.
Thank you for the explanation, Sourabh. My follow-up question derives some sort of flavor from what you just said. I think apart from clarity, one of the underlying themes I found was efficiency, right? Now, as someone who's sitting in your chair, overseeing, large product teams, overseeing multiple product lines, you also have to keep in mind that the modus operandi of fraud around each of these product lines is different, right? So how do you think about that problem statement, firstly? Secondly, what goes behind some of these decisions that you have to take as a product leader? Like, do I build this on my own? Do I buy this? If you could just shed some light on that.
When I built the structure, right, there were some of the teams that were built which didn't exist at that time. And people came to me and asked question, but what is this team supposed to do? For example, we were running growth campaigns, but there was no growth team. Similarly, there was no fraud team that existed, right? So you have to think about future, because even if you don't have those teams today, you'll need them in future. And when you need those teams, you should know where do they structurally fit, okay? Now, coming back to the point you're making around fraud, I think a lot of people or companies have this misconception that, you just need to fight fraud once in one area. And that's not, I think, how it works. Your fraud strategy needs to encompass your entire customer life cycle and your product life cycle. So it's not just onboarding, it's transaction monitoring and so on. Okay. So when we were building the team, I was clear that this team will work in a hub and spoke model, where this team will partner with, let's say, fraud operations, with fraud analysts to build tooling to support and enable them to, take actions, which means things around building a back office for, let's say, just managing the tickets, or building a rule engine where decisions can be taken, or building a sanction service to sanction abusers or fraudsters who are on the platform, right? So this will act as a hub. And then various teams that we have, like other service teams, will pass on data, right? So for this team to take decision, right? So everything which was internal for us from a pattern recognition perspective, we were very clear that we are going to do it on our own. But for any rule engine, as you understand, it's all about how effective decisions you can take. Now, while we had our internal data to take decision, we didn't have a lot of external signals as well. And that's where we took a call very early that for things like, let's say, device intelligence, user biometrics, and other external signals, we will rely on companies like Bureau to provide us that information, because this is a specialized product. And while every product company can build products, right, we were very clear that we did not want it to divert our focus from our core offering, that we are a fintech platform. Our focus would be on building products on financial services angle and not on this side, right? And initially, we also had a limited bandwidth. So we had to be very careful about where we spend our capacity. So early years, a lot more decisions were tilted towards buy, where the technology piece was more complicated to build in-house. But as we have progressed, we take a decision based on the ROI now. If we have the technical know-how to build a certain product and we have the capacity to do that, then we will evaluate if it's a right return or investment to build it on our own or not. And accordingly, we take a decision, right? Couple of products that we have moved away where we were using partners before, and we are in the process of moving away from our partners and doing it in-house. AI also helps with that, as you know. So that's how we are looking at it. We look at each angle very clearly where we can add value more by doing it ourselves, or it's better to get a partner doing that for us. I'll give a feedback in general on SaaS for that, right? And this I share with a lot of other partners who I work with. I think one of the problems with SaaS companies is they keep on building products, right? They keep on adding features, but they are very bad with evangelizing those to their existing users. So what ends up happening most of the times is if you're using a product, you're ending up only using 20% of their features and offering. You're not using 80% of it, and you're not seeing the full value of that product. So then when you're using just a 20%, the question becomes, hey, I can do this 20% on my own as well. Why do I need them? I think that's where SaaS companies also need to do their homework better to evangelize about their offerings in a bit.
So Sourabh, you mentioned the buzzword AI, and we have had some conversations on this offline. I want your perspective on certain things like how does someone in your chair think about AI adoption at Flip? Now, what I mean by this is there are things that you have to be proactive about, there are things that you have to be reactive about, and there are things that you just do because you know that it will provide value in the very long term. So if you could tell us, something along those lines of what happened at Flip.
Actually, I was waiting for this question because there's no podcast which is done today without AI coming in the picture, and probably I'll try to answer it in a real way without any buzzwords or any fancy stuff, right? So for me, I think very early, I think 2 years back when GPT and all the generative AI was coming up, I think I was very clear in terms of where the future is going to be, right? I could envision that future of all teams, right, be it product, design, data, right, they are going to be AI-enabled team. That's the future, right? It was very clear. And if you look back 10 years ago, in product companies, the common buzzwords were data-driven, data-informed, data-led, right? Everyone used to talk about data. And I was clear that that's going to be the future where instead of data, it's going to be AI. Are you AI-driven? Are you AI-enabled? Are you AI-led, right? So one of the things which I did was, and again, I wasn't an expert back 2 years back, I was an expert in AI. But I wanted to be clear that in my team, I have AI evangelists, people who can drive it, right? So, because you need people in the team who are good with the technology, who can transfer that to other people, be it through training, session, being that example to others. So we did some good hiring decisions a couple of years back. They were open roles and we got in people who were AI driven, right? And they really helped us to shape where we are today. And I'm very proud to say this today, that what I see in this region, Flip's product design teams are way ahead in terms of AI usage compared to RPs of our sizes, right? We have designers today who can ship code in production. I have product features which have gone live, which have done completely by designers, right? I have product managers who are doing automations on their own, reducing the bandwidth that engineers need to spend on things. So that has really had an effect, because my focus wasn't innovation initially. It was productivity. Like, how do you become more productive? Because the goal of AI, in my opinion, wasn't to replace human beings, right? It was to augment what they were doing, to give that superpower to them to be much more productive. And that's what we are seeing today. And it also comes from how you're thinking of future and direction that you're giving to the team. For example, I told a very controversial thing to the team. I think it was a year back or so. I said that, in product management in general, there is a low-level work and there's a high-level work. I said, writing PRD is a low-level work. If you can automate it, right? I want your time to go on solving problems, on doing things which cannot be automated or done with AI, right? And that's how we have built a process. We have built multiple agents where you have a concept, a simple document, etc. It goes into agent which spins out a PRD from it, that goes to another agent which creates, let's say, Jira tickets from it. It goes to another agent which does TikTok. So all of this is linked. This has saved us so much time that this time is now going more productively in figuring out the problems of our consumers and how do we solve that. So that's how we approached it, and the results are there. So not only in terms of productivity, but what is also happening in Flip and globally in a lot of Western companies as well is the lines between the roles are getting blurred. Okay. Earlier, it was very clear, like I talked in my first question, like product engineering design, right? Even then, in between them, the lines are getting blurred because your designer can code, your engineer can, write a product spec, and, your product manager can design now with cloud design and whatnot, right? So these lines are getting blurred, and I've seen the impact of that in Flip. We have had copywriters, right? Traditional UX copywriters who can design now. And that's the power of AI, right? So when people think about, okay, AI is there, it's going to take away your jobs, I think it's for people who don't want to adopt it. If you adopt it, it will make you much more skilled. Your impact is going to be much more pronounced and valued in the organization.
No, I think at Bureau also, while AI is pretty much at the core of what our product and tech teams are doing today, and I hope my product and tech teams don't kill me for trying to sound smart on their behalf. But I'll just touch upon a few points, like you mentioned, right? Think of it this way: our FRM product, right? When we speak to multiple banking clients, right, who have great use for transaction monitoring, for fraud risk management at a post onboarding and at a transaction level, what we realized is that fraud analysts spend 90% of their time, sort of just checking off low risk alerts, right? The actual high risk alerts, which are the ones which are dangerous to your organization, and maybe 1 or 2%, but they're spending 90% of their time in dispositioning of things that can be easily done by an agent today. So I think the FRM team did a great job in sort of getting an agentic layer in between, right, to dispose of the low risk alerts so that the fraud analyst at the bank can actually focus on what is important, right? That's there. So this was something that our product and tech teams had invested time and energy back, way before, when people were not talking about it. We are seeing the good results of it today. Another good example is, investing in Bayesian models, which help us also to discover, that an account is being taken over. You don't see the value of that immediately, but it comes over time, right? And at times you have to be reactive to the market. Like in Southeast Asia, deepfakes just went through the roof,
Tell
right?
me about it.
Yeah, went through the roof all of a sudden, and we just had to come up with things like, okay, how do we deal with injected images? How do we deal with silicon masks and things like that, right? So proactive and reactive both. Thanks, Sourabh.
You touched a very good point, which I want to talk about, right? When you're talking about, risk analysts, that is what I like, that you don't need to do grunt work anymore. Yeah. There is someone else to do their grunt work, because, as part of, as you grow in an organization, you're like, okay, we need to work hard, etc. Sure, but if there is an agent to do that, then why don't you work things on which are more value add than doing this grunt work, right? And that's where I see a lot of value which AI brings in, to a point that, earlier the teams were so dependent on, let's say, data analysts, because let's say everyone who's not very comfortable with writing queries and whatnot. AI just does it for you. So your time to insight has reduced. Your time to achieving outcome has reduced because of that. And that's the real value, right? Everything is not about innovating something which is out of the world. It's about doing what you're doing in a much better way.
Yeah, and since you touched upon time, right, like just borrowing from what I was referring to earlier, right? So the other thing that also works out very well with AI is that now our clients, right, our banking clients don't have to wait for 1 or 2 dev cycles, right? So if, let's say, the agent has done the work of telling you which are the low risk sort of alerts and you should not pay attention to, all of it gets baked into the ML models, right? And then you don't have to be dependent on the tech team of the bank to maybe release it in the next dev cycle. It gets baked in immediately in the loop.
So feedback loops are just much faster.
Correct.
Got it.
So I think thank you for all the insights that you have been sharing so far, Sourabh. But you have had a ringside view in into the fintech boom in the Southeast Asia space, right? I just wanted to understand that as someone who breathes product, data, and design for a living, for companies like us, which are also very product and tech focused, do you have any tips, right, for my colleagues as to how we can think about solving product problems, right, in general, and more specifically to, let's say, the domain where Flip operates in the best, which is the payments and remittance space? Any tips there?
It's an interesting one, and honestly, I'm not a SaaS product expert, but I'll try to answer your question from, let's say, a consumer of SaaS products, right? On how do I think about it? Since you touched about fintech, right? If you look at the last decade, fintech has all been about convenience, speed, efficiency, reliability, cost. That's what different companies are competing, against each other. That we are faster or we are much cheaper, etc., etc. I think the next decade, this is going to be table stakes. Okay, this is not going to be a differentiator. As we see today, increasingly more and more people are putting most of their financial journey online. Right, there's a push from the central banks as well to digitize, and it's not going anywhere. Right, so when a user's entire financial journey is online, what you need to build for them is trust and confidence to be using that platform. Because if they don't trust your platform, why will they put money in that, right? So I think the next differentiator is going to be how much confidence or trust a user has on your product. And that's where I think companies like Bureau have a lot of room to play. We discussed about AI just in a question before, right? And while AI is giving us superpowers, it is giving superpowers to everyone, right? That means good and bad both, right? We all have heard rumors about what Mythos can do. It's like a mystery to everyone. But if the governments are scared, then that should tell you, right, what AI can really do, right, if it's in the wrong hands. So that's where I fully believe that in future, leveraging AI, your fraudsters and bad actors will continue doing whatever they were doing much more efficiently, because their productivity is also going to increase, right? Identity thefts, as we talked about, deepfakes, they're all going to increase, account takeovers, right? And that is where I think for fintech companies, it's going to be tough to manage all of that on their own, okay? Because you need specialists for that. And that's where I think companies like Bureau, you need to probably start thinking from a perspective, not of just building a fraud tooling, like for your product team, I'm saying, not just building tools or products, but how are you building that confidence in these platforms by partnering with other fintechs, right? And how are you making sure that it's only the, let's say, bad actors who are impacted? Because you always have to have a balance between security and user experience. You cannot have a lot of false positives. That just gives bad experience, right? I think that's my first kind of a tip on how to focus on. The other thing that I will kind of add is you need to have a local understanding of emerging fraud patterns. You cannot always take a global view on what is happening, because a lot of time the modus operandi are very localized. So the more insights your team has on local fraud patterns, the more custom their solution can be, and it's easier for the solution to fit in, right? If you take a generic approach, it's hard to work, right? So you have to build that ability where you address a problem which is happening in Indonesia, and you also address a problem which is probably happening in Kazakhstan, right? So that sort of rigor is, I think, a way to go ahead for your team as well. And my last point would be around thinking of yourself as being that infrastructure player. The beauty of infrastructure players is they exist, customers never know about it. But without them, no platform works, right? So be that invisible infrastructure players that make sure that everything is up and running. Because when fraud systems work efficiently, no one knows about it. But if they don't, then everyone knows about it, right? So think about yourself like that. I think so. Those will be few tips from my side on that.
All right. Just on what you said, I just remember something that our CEO Ranjan says quite often, which aligns a little to what you said, right? Which says that in fraud management, you have to look at very, very like different sort of things, right? Now everybody is taking flights. Somebody is taking a flight to, stop fraud at device level. Somebody is doing it at an identity level. Bureau's job has to be to build the airport, right? Build that entire infrastructure, build that entire architecture around it. I also believe that that's the way we are headed. So thanks, Saurabh. I think as always, it has been a masterclass and a great session with you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And I hope that we get to do this in the future as well.
Sure.
And guys, that's a wrap on the second episode of Bureau Bytes. Stay tuned for the next one.